I think we can kick off there. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Why UBI, Empowering Democracy, Gender Equality, and Technological Unemployment. My name is Kenneth DAMIEN. I'm the chair of the LSE Alumni Association London, and we're very excited to bring you this event in collaboration with the LSE Alumni Global Real Estate Group and the Citizens Basic Income Research Development Culture and Dissemination Society, Istanbul, Turkey. We are going to shortly go to an introduction with our expert panel, but just a few points of housekeeping before we kick things off. This event is intended to be split between a general panel discussion, which will be chaired by myself and putting questions to the panel, and an audience Q&A through which you as our attendees can ask questions. There's a Q&A function within the Zoom meet, and we very much want to encourage an active discussion around the topic area. So please do feel free to ask questions as the discussion is ensuing, and we'll be sure to put that to the panel following on from the panel discussion. The session will be recorded, and we'll be posting that on our YouTube channel for you to check out, and will be accessible there post the event. Our panel is very much looking at making a case for UBI from their various expertise perspectives, and also from jurisdictions of their experience. I will be looking to put questions to them that kind of press for answers in relation to the case being made, and really engage in an intellectual excavation of the kind of discussion points that we're looking at. But if you have any kind of critiques, or you feel there are any geographical experiences that you'd like to raise, please do raise those in the Q&A, and we'll definitely seek to attend to those during the Q&A session. But with that, I think we can kick off the discussion, and I'll ask our panel to introduce themselves and in kind of short summary, give their kind of case of why they think implementing UBI is a good idea. I think we'll kick off with you, Malcolm, if that's all right.
Okay, I'm Malcolm Torry. I was until recently the director of the Citizens Basic Income Trust in the UK, and I was also until recently a visiting senior fellow at the London School of Economics. I'm still the general manager of BN, the Basic Income Earth Network, which facilitates debate about basic income around the world. I've been involved in this debate since, well, in one sense, since the late 1970s, when for 2 years I administered means-tested benefits in Brixton's means-tested benefits office in South London. I was the man behind the counter, sandwiched between the claimants and the staff. We all knew that means-tested benefits were awful. And we all thought that universal benefits were brilliant and there ought to be more of them. And in 1984, the Basic Income Research Group started, and I've been involved in that ever since. It's became the Citizens Basic Income Trust. I've written a number of books on the subject and done some research on feasibility over the years. It's a brilliant idea of basic income simply because it provides financial security, it will create social cohesion, it will be simple and transparent to administer. One of the books I've written is called 101 Reasons for a Citizen's Income, Basic Income. There are more reasons than that.
Lovely. Almaz, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks for including me, Ken. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Almaz ZELLEKE, and I am an associate professor of practice and political science at NYU Shanghai. My work focuses on ethical aspects of the argument for basic income, and I have also recently begun work on comparative political economy, partly as a result of being in Shanghai and trying to understand the Chinese economy, but also growing out of my interest in welfare systems and basic income in particular. I think basic income is a great idea because it addresses some of the problems in advanced capitalist societies and other societies as well that we tend to think of as being intractable. Poverty, economic insecurity, inequality between the genders, and inequality in general. Basic income is a very simple and effective an efficient policy response to these issues. And it's also a normative perspective on many of the underlying causes of these issues, why we have inequality in the first place, why we have poverty in the first place in society. Basic income as a normative perspective that regards everyone as being equally entitled to the basic necessities of life can help us address many other social problems as well.
Lovely. Thank you, Almaz. And last but certainly not least, Ali Mutlu.
Thank you, Ken. 1 second. Okay. Dear friends, this is Mutlu KÖYLÜOğlu from Istanbul, Turkey. I am the co-founder and the chair of Citizens Basic Income Research, Development, Culture and Dissemination Society, founded in Istanbul, Turkey. I am also a member of UBI, Universal Basic Income Europe, since spring 2016, and also BN, Basic Income Earth Network. It's coordinating the bi-weekly worldwide meetings of UBI advocates and UBI networks, and several more international projects. Income, Research, Development and Culture. Development, Culture and Dissemination Society. I would like to thank LSE Alumni Association for their collaboration during the organization of this event. Of course, I would like to thank to our dear friends, dear Dr. Almaz, for their contributions. The title of our meeting is Why UBI? Empowering Democracy, Gender Inequality and Technological Unemployment. At this stage, what I would like to say is that UBI will lead to the glory of humanity, and democracy must and will enable UBI, which in fact will be the savior of herself too. I would like to repeat, democracy must and will enable UBI, which in fact will be the savior of herself too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ali Mutlu. So I guess we've heard the phrase a lot, both, I guess, it used to be on the fringes of policy circles, but now has become a bit more mainstream. But when we say universal basic income, Malcolm, what exactly do we mean by that?
We mean it's an entirely unconditional income for every individual, by which we mean everyone of the same age would receive exactly the same amount of money every week or every month. There'd be no conditions attached whatsoever. So it would not matter how much you earned or your wealth. It wouldn't matter whether you were in employment or not. It wouldn't matter whether you lived in a household with lots of people or you lived on your own. Household structure, work status, income, wealth would make absolutely no difference to the basic income. It would come at the same rate to absolutely everyone every week or every month. The only condition allowed would be that it might alter in relation to your age. And that's permitted because you can have no effect on your age. Once the computer knows what your date of birth was, it knows how old you are. And so the simple administration of basic income is preserved. And that's what really matters, to provide the security of income that people are now so desperately in need of. That income has to keep coming with absolutely no change. And the important thing about basic income is you could turn it on at your birth, and you could turn it on at your death, turn it off at your death, and it would need no active administration in between. It would be a solid platform on which to build. Sometimes the words basic income are used to mean something that is not a basic income. So always look at the detail when someone tells you that they are testing a basic income or discussing a basic income. Sometimes people use the same words to express an income tested benefit that goes down if your earned income goes up. That is not a basic income. It is only a basic income or a universal basic income or a citizen's income if it stays exactly the same, whatever your circumstances and however your circumstances change. That's what we're talking about this evening.
Sure. Thanks very much for unpackaging that for us, Malcolm. So as a jumping off point, how does what you've just said contrast with what the way our current welfare practices are structured presently, and also has also the kind of the UK government and international governments across the world have engaged in kind of large scale fiscal interventions. Do any of those approximate to universal basic income? And have you got any thoughts around that?
In relation to the first part of your question, the vast majority of developed economies have benefit systems that are made up of three parts. There will be a handful sometimes of unconditional universal benefits. And in the United Kingdom, we have a child benefit that is still unconditional and paid at the same rate for every child in every family. It's not affected by your income, household structure, or anything else. Some countries have entirely unconditional pension systems, but we don't, but some countries do, and those are genuine basic incomes. The question you ask is it affected in any way by your income, your household structure, your wealth, or anything? If it's not, then it's a basic income. So yes, some of them exist in our current economies. The other elements of our benefit systems, the means tested ones that are tested in relation to your income, and they might impose work tests on you or other tests, those are not basic incomes and are a long way from them. They are complicated, stigmatizing, degrading. They dig people into poverty, which they then can't climb out of. And they are in many ways totally appalling. They are the opposite of a basic income. There are also social insurance systems in a variety of developed countries. These rely on your contributions records. Some are run by governments, some run by independent organizations, employers or trades unions. They have a condition attached to them, that is, you get them if you are ill or unemployed, and you get them if you have paid sufficient contributions. They are conditional incomes. They're not as bad as means-tested benefits, but they are a lot worse than a basic income, universal basic income, because of their conditionalities. Basic income, yes, there are some around. The very, very few of the recent COVID-related government interventions have characteristics anything like a universal basic income. Interestingly, the island of Tuvalu, with a population of 11,000, is currently paying a basic income. We've been doing quite a lot of research, as much as we can, using a team of volunteers to find out what is happening in a variety of countries around the world. That's the only genuine basic income we've found so far. There are promises of basic incomes for short periods in a number of countries. One of the most interesting is South Africa. Whether it turns into a real basic income, it will be interesting to watch. We don't yet know exactly what's going to happen. Because sometimes people, as I've said, sometimes people use the word basic income and it's not what they mean. You do have to look at the details. So most of the mechanisms put in place by governments are differently packaged for different groups of people. That is, if you have been employed recently, you get one package. If you have been self-employed, you get another. If you haven't got enough to live on and you fall through the other safety nets, then you enter another one, and that's usually a means-tested system. It's a bit chaotic. Governments are doing what they can, I have to say, and one should never criticize what is being done. They are simply doing what they can do at the moment. And one of the problems that many countries have is that they cannot, at the moment, implement a genuine basic income. We couldn't do it in the UK because there isn't a sufficiently robust database with all of the necessary contact details and bank account details on it. So we couldn't in the UK implement a basic income just at the moment. And many other countries are in the same position. The governments are doing what they can. It would be nice if some of the things we've learned during this pandemic about how insecure the employment market and incomes now are would inspire a little hard work on putting together the databases that would be needed to pay a genuine basic income, either after this pandemic has subsided or when the next one emerges, which it will, and we need to be prepared for it.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Ken?
Definitely. Sorry, Almaz, go on.
I was just saying, could I add something
Absolutely.
to what Malcolm said?
Sure.
So
I was
I
going
think
to go to you next.
Great. I think Malcolm has done a great job, giving a definition of basic income. I just wanted to maybe try to distill it into a visual that might work for some of the listeners who are maybe less familiar with basic income or with social security systems around the world. So you can think of cash transfers as falling into 4 quadrants. Right, and the quadrants would be on the basis of whether they are conditional or unconditional, and whether they're means tested or not. So basic income falls into the quadrant of a cash transfer that is neither means tested nor conditional. Now the conditions can be things like what Malcolm said, you have to have a prior contribution history or a prior work history, or you have to be willing to work. Means testing refers to whether you have to pass an income test in order to receive an income or an asset test in order to receive the benefit. So typically what that means is you have to prove that you are poor. You have to prove that you are destitute. And you have to prove what your income is. And it's particularly difficult for people at the lower end of the income scale who don't have an annual salary that is, published and known from the beginning of the year, but might work intermittent hours or seasonal work. And so their income might actually fluctuate quite a bit. So means testing is a real barrier toward getting these benefits. So that's why the means testing part is important, and the conditionality part is important because, in fact, many of the most needy people are the people who don't have a prior earnings record or who can't access work currently, right? So if you think about those sort of 4 quadrants, that's a way of visualizing how different kinds of benefits that our listeners might be familiar with fall into those categories. I think in the quadrant of unconditional and means tested, that's where basic income advocates and scholars might disagree about whether the basic income can vary by age, or whether it should go to children as well as adults, or whether it goes to immigrants, or only to permanent residents or residents with legal status, that kind of thing, right? It's always a political decision who you include in the political community, but a basic income would go to all members of the political community without condition, without means test. And I also just want to highlight the idea that it's an individual benefit rather than a household benefit. Again, some people who talk about basic income may not highlight that, but for me, that's important because that's an important part of the gender egalitarian aspects of a basic income, that it not be adjusted on the basis of how large your household is.
So on those points and on your distinctions, it seems to me, so just to play devil's advocate, a cynical view might be that a universal basic income in many ways trades out the challenges of means testing for the administrative ease of a universal basic income. But does that not risk giving people giving the money to people who either don't need it, or on the flip side, quote unquote, don't deserve it because they haven't demonstrated, by societal standards, contributions to society on some level? And just to tie that in as well, if you have any specific experiences from your work in the US or in experiences in China, great to hear that as well from a local perspective.
Sure. So I think that one of the aspects that we didn't talk about, or we haven't talked about yet, is the financing of a basic income. So there are many different possible ways of financing a basic income, funding the basic income. In my view, it has to be funded by taxes in order to really be considered a basic income. So some people might say, well, if it's going to be taxed away, from people, well, that's just means testing of a different sort. And one can make that argument, but it's really important that the benefits are accessible to people who need them the most without going through any kind of calculation of income or assets. And so then the question is it financed by a consumption tax that falls broadly across society, an income tax, or a wealth tax, if we're trying to get at inequality in particular? Those are all ways in which, in a sense, you could be clawing back the basic income from people who are wealthy enough or have high enough income or high enough consumption, but it's not the same thing as means testing before the people who are the neediest and who really need the benefits are able to access them. So that's one answer to your question. I think means testing, we have to think about what it is that we mean when we say means testing. And for me, what it means is it's that ex ante, sort of barrier to accessing the benefit, because maybe this month your income is high, even though last month and maybe the next month your income is going to be very low. And then the other question is, what are we trying to achieve with our social policy? If our goal is to make sure that no scroungers are able to access benefits that they don't deserve, then that's why we have conditionality and we have means tests. If we instead adopt a perspective that says, we believe that everybody should have the means necessary for life, and that those who then are so successful that perhaps they don't need that benefit, then we find ways of getting that back from them in taxes or other contributions to society. But the basic premise of a basic income is that everyone is deserving of at least the basic necessities of life and the means to access them.
I think our UK listeners will appreciate both your expertise and your use of the word scroungers as well, which is local vernacular. Yes, sorry, Ali Mutlu, over to you.
One other important issue here is that the human dignity is very important. Nobody should make an application or should provide certain documentation. And also, it shouldn't introduce new classes. Let's say the people who are receiving basic income and the people who are not receiving basic income. Or if you are talking about the kids who are from a family who receives basic income and the kids who are not receiving. I mean, it shouldn't lead to a new classification. I mean, we shouldn't introduce something that will disturb the society too. So human dignity is important. There shouldn't be any additional bureaucracy. It is also important.
Sure.
No strings attached. It's also another important issue. I mean, the humanitarian touch is very, very important. Sometimes we come across with the question that the people who do have money, let's say a businessman, should he receive this also? Yes, he should receive it. But this doesn't mean that he is earning money from basic income, because the habitat which will enable the basic income implementation will in fact maybe introduce him some additional taxes. That's why at the end of the day, he will not be earning money from basic income implementation. He will lose. But in any case, by all the people of this country, everybody should receive the same amount so that nobody will think that, okay, these are the people who receive basic income, these are people who do not. It's like a voting right in a country. It should be a right to all people.
Sure. So just on that point, Ali Mutlu, because I know we're going to get to this later on, but I guess one of the challenges with universal basic income, once you've kind of solved perhaps the infrastructure problem that Malcolm described, once you jump over the hurdles of kind of getting past the arguments about means testing, is almost the political will to get governments to back it or to get the public to get behind it. Do you see that as shifting with the times? Do you think more people are likely to be in favor of it? And do you see it as being a split between left and right, or is it a bipartisan issue?
Let me, I mean, at the point of implementation, I think my belief is that there are three main problems on the table. I mean, it's not about whether it's right or left. I mean, it's not regarding the existing ideologies, because existing ideologies are in fact evolving too, because the value set is changing. So the existing ideology do not have the columns underneath them. The three problems is, the first one is UBI and UBI's possible positive contributions to the people, to the society, or to the economies are not yet widely and clearly known by the masses. So dissemination of the idea of the concept is not adequate yet. So this is the biggest problem. But there are two other problems. Both are related with the political figures, political parties, and politicians. The second problem is that a significant number of political parties are losing their political party identities gradually, moving away from the claim of solving the problems of the masses or the society. They are evolving into interest networks of few individuals. So this is another issue.
Sure.
when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking for my country only. We have very close communication with the UBI advocates from all different corners of the world. So this is another important issue. But the third one, I guess this is also important, again related with the politicians. Although some political players have been using the terminology of UBI, they have been heavily modifying it, degenerating, denigrating the concept of UBI.
Sure.
Even some of them are positioning some of their current or old policies as if they are a counterpart of UBI.
Sure.
And all such efforts are pulling down the UBI concept and trying to corrupt it. The solution is, I think we have to make an extensive public awareness campaigns, and thanks this opportunity, it's also very valuable. And we have to be very carefully protect the characteristics and soul of the UBI concept, which Malcolm and Almaz both mentioned about this. I mean, the characteristics of the UBI concept is very, very important. I mean, not the terminology, but the characteristics and the soul of the concept.
Sure. No, absolutely. So Almaz, actually, if I could come back to you, I know there's been a lot of talk in the US, especially about kind of political capture and lobbyists. Do you see specifically within the, so actually two questions here. Have you been impressed at all in terms of the fiscal intervention of the Trump administration? I think I'm guessing I can anticipate a response to that. But the second is, what function do you think UBI is could play within the context of the kind of some of the cynicism around US politics, you know, in relation to you know, policies like Andrew Yang's freedom dividend, etc.
Well, to start with the question of the current fiscal interventions, you know, we in the United States, all residents under with an income under $75,000 a year received a $1,200 payment, and in addition, unemployment insurance beneficiaries, so these are the newly jobless who have a recent work record, received a $600 weekly supplement to their benefits. Sure. And I think that one of the things that's really interesting about that weekly supplement is that originally what Congress wanted to do was it wanted to increase the percentage of the salary that had been lost that were paid out in unemployment benefits. Sure. And it was not possible. Because we have such an antiquated unemployment insurance benefits system, and we have 50 state-based systems, that instead Congress just had to give everybody $600 a week in addition to their whatever the state calculation was for benefits, which it was in fact more than many of those unemployed made on a weekly basis. So that's a perfect illustration of the problem of our current welfare system. Number one, you know, we have these antiquated state and local systems. One federal system would be much more efficient. And number two, any welfare system or social assistance program that tries to target its benefit to either the employed or the unemployed risks this problem that the benefit, if it's high enough to allow people to have a decent life, could be more than people are making who are working full time. And so a benefit that goes to both the working and the jobless is the most efficient in terms of giving everybody the economic security that program was designed for.
So just on that, do you have any thoughts in terms of, because I found it very interesting personally that Andrew Yang, who's kind of seen as the forebear to the UBI policy within US politics, during his campaign, he continued to be in favor of his freedom dividend, but then reversed his position on Medicaid for all, which seems to me to have two policies pulling in different directions. And do you think that conversations politically around UBI in the US need to walk hand in hand with kind of developing a public healthcare infrastructure analogous to Europe, the UK, or countries like that?
Absolutely. I mean, again, that's my perception of a basic income, is that it's both a policy, it's a particular kind of policy intervention, but it's also a perspective. And it's a perspective that encourages us to think about universal benefits in all realms of society. So absolutely, Medicaid or Medicare for all some kind of universal healthcare provision is absolutely necessary in the United States. And the only thing I can say about Andrew Yang is, that I have the benefit of being a political scientist with an academic position. He's
Sure.
running for office, so he has to say things that are more broadly, politically acceptable, which I think is the reason his policy proposal was called a freedom dividend, which was likely to appeal more to conservatives and Republicans in the U.S. than a basic income might.
Sure. So just drawing upon this and going to you now, Malcolm, and given your background, research, and expertise, would you say that most conversations around universal basic income kind of place it as being supplemental to or replacing current systems of welfare benefits in that regard?
The current debate about basic income couldn't be more diverse. There's a vast spectrum of views about how it would be implemented, how it would be paid for. You look around the world at the basic income movement, it gets more diverse every year. And that's a good thing. I've got absolutely no problem with that. We need people with all kinds of views, right from the totally practical to the absolutely utopian, because that's what creates a lively debate. Where my own research has been as to what would be actually feasible to implement in the current political situation in the United Kingdom. It's a very narrow agenda, but it's an agenda which all of us, wherever we are in the world, are going to have to tackle, because it's all very well debating a large basic income for everybody if that is simply, there's no point if that's simply not feasible given the current institutions that we've got. The way the British, and this may be different in other countries, but the way the British social policy change evolves is normally by slow and careful steps building on what is there already. And that's how it usually works. Which means that if we're going to see a basic income implemented, then that's what you're going to have to do. And it is perfectly possible to do that. There's nothing impossible about implementing a genuine basic income under those circumstances. And the research that we've done at the Institute for Social and Economic Research at the University of Essex shows just how possible it will be. And in a minute, I'll put in the chat box the link to the most recent microsimulation research that we've done. What that research shows is that it's simply not possible at the moment to implement a basic income scheme that would abolish existing means-tested benefits. It's just not possible. Because if you did it, you would tip far too many low-income households into deeper poverty. That's simply what would happen. So you have to leave the existing benefit system in place, then you implement your basic income, you fund it by reducing income tax personal allowances, and a variety of other small changes. And that would automatically take a lot of households off means-tested benefits. It's that way around. You would achieve what you wanted to do largely by not doing what you wanted to do. And it's that kind of practical attitude that we're going to need. And what that turns out as, the most recent feasibility study shows us that what would be completely feasible would be a basic income that is at £60 a week for every working age adult, and smaller amounts for children, and an addition to the basic state pension that we've currently got. It doesn't sound like a lot, but for a family of four, say, that would provide them with something like a £220 solid, secure base on which to build every week. And for many households, that will be a huge change to what they now experience. Because now, from so many households in our society, absolutely everything is at risk.
So just two questions on this, Malcolm. One is, I understand your research is UK based. Is
Yeah,
that
that's
correct?
right.
Correct.
It would be different in different countries. This is entirely context specific.
No, but I think it's a very interesting example to draw upon, in that on the basis of the figure that you've just mentioned, it would seem that the goal of the universal basic income, from your perspective or in relation to the study, is not simply to keep a family above the poverty line, but to, as it were, give them some level of subsistence that is in excess of that.
Yes, now we're not necessarily talking about more money in the system. And I mean, at the moment, and for the next decades, there will be no point in discussing that kind of scenario.
Sure.
What we are looking to do is to provide a secure base for everyone, for every individual, remember, not just households, every individual. And at the same time, one of the feasibility tests that I set before each research project starts is that every poverty index must go down at the implementation of the basic income, and inequality must go down as well. And if you read the paper that I've just put in the chat box late after this meeting, then people will see how that works. You set your feasibility criteria, incredibly realistic ones, and then you work out what's possible. That's the way round that we've all got to do it if we're going to live in the real world.
Sure.
And what really matters is that in that basic income scheme, you have a genuine basic income that will be completely unconditional.
Sure. So I want to dive into a kind of a key subject area and just draw upon some of the things that you've mentioned, Malcolm, in terms of some of the key kind of critiques of this approach. And I think one is this question of whether universal basic income enables, quote unquote, a lazy poor, or empowers undesirable demerit effects within the economy, i.e., I mean, to put it really sparsely, if you give certain members of the population who aren't used to having this income, the income when they haven't earned it, they will use it to they'll be incentivized to stay away from work, or they'll spend it on demerit goods such as alcohol, tobacco, etc. What's your view on that kind of argument?
The exact opposite would be the case. At the moment in UK society, we have a means tested benefit system. And therefore, although, I mean, theoretically, nobody should be left without money. Now, there are some people who are, because there are stiff sanctions involved in that system, which is despicable. And there are many who just never quite get through the application process because it's so dreadful. But in theory, everyone has an income. The problem with that income is it disincentivizes employment, because as soon as you earn a bit more money, your benefits are withdrawn. And that is no incentive whatsoever. If you had a secure base that would never be taken away, then none of that would be withdrawn as your earned income rose. Now, if you were still on means tested benefits, then you would be on less of them. And so you would much sooner be off them and able to increase your disposable income as your earned income rose.
Sure.
If your basic incomes took you off means tested benefits, which for many households they would, then suddenly you find that each extra pound that you earn actually turns into something worth having because your benefits are no longer being withdrawn. So precisely the opposite of the prejudice is what would occur. The problem is that's counterintuitive.
Sure.
You can explain rationally to people,
but the data doesn't bear that out.
If you give people you give everyone the money unconditionally, then they will be more likely to work. It still doesn't go in here because they don't believe it somehow. And I actually don't know how you get round that problem. It's the same problem as the idea, the intuitive idea that if the poor need money, you give money to the poor. Now, intuitively, that's obvious. It's counterintuitive to say it's much better to give money to everybody and then you tax the rich. But that doesn't go in. And I don't know the answer to that. If anybody knows the answer to those two questions.
Well, I mean, are there any sources, Malcolm, that you could particularly point people to where they can have a look at this? Because from what I'm hearing is at a very basic level, the argument that I've just made, the data doesn't bear that out. Because as you say, when people have a secure income base that's never going to be taken away, the incentive is that whatever you work for, you're not incentivizing staying away from work on the basis that your welfare may be taken away. You have a base on which to build, and anything you build on top of that, you keep, essentially.
Yeah, people do want to work, do want to produce, do want to look after their families. People do want to do these things. And what the tragedy is that our current benefit systems stop them doing it.
Sure.
That's what's so awful about it. Now, well, one of the interesting results that came out of the 2 genuine pilot projects that have happened so far in Namibia and India. Now, these are not developed economies, so you can't necessarily transfer the results to what would happen in a developed economy. But I think there's a sense in which you can. What we discovered was that those who earned the least in those communities increased rapidly their economic activity, up by 200% in Namibia amongst the lowest earnings decile. And what was going on clearly was that because for the first time they had a very small level of secure income, they were able to take some risks. They were able to think about starting businesses or a cooperative or doing things with other people with that money, and to earn some more money. And because a secure base gives you something to start with. And I'm quite sure that what we would see is not necessarily an increase in employment with a basic income. I think we would be likely to see would be a much more diverse income generation scenario.
Sure.
Because we would see more cooperatives, more businesses starting, we would see more self-employment, we would see more people looking for a variety of sources of income. And they would be able to do it because they've got a secure base to start with.
So just on the quick, yeah, sorry, go on,
can I? Oh, okay. Regarding this issue, there are many pilots and experimental studies, and the results of them are published. I mean, very easily we can figure out that it's not leading to extra consumption of alcoholic drinks or drugs or laziness, etc.
Yeah.
But one interesting thing is, if I'm not mistaken, at the upstate New York area, or maybe at the north of New York, there is a zone, it's an Indian area. And in that zone, they have the land and they have some rights separate than the federal laws, I guess. And they organized a company. And all the members of this tribe are also members or a kind of cooperative or whatever. But what's the point is, this facility is generating money and giving this money periodically to the members of this Indian tribe members, let's say.
Sure.
And there are some academic studies, I mean, a master thesis, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe PhD, I'm not sure, but graduate studies regarding what changed in their lives. Did they stop working, or did they start drinking more alcohol? I mean, they make some comparisons, etc., etc. And these are all, again, positive. So the rumors like the consumption of alcohol or drug will increase, people will not do anything. These are not correct, I guess. And there's a very interesting, unfortunately, we are not all together with our friends. I mean, during this meeting, if there was a small experimental study which can be done within a group, but now, unfortunately, it's not possible to do it here.
Well, I mean, if you've got details of that, Mutlu, we'll definitely pass that on amongst our...
Do you want me to say a few words about this experiment?
Yeah, sure. Like, why don't you explain it to us in terms of...
Let's say, assume that there are 100 people in a meeting room, and this was done in Austria first time, I guess. And the speaker is asking the people, look around and tell me if UBI is implemented in this country, do you think that these people will stop working and will be lazy and will sleep for long times, etc., etc.? And let's say 95 or huge percentage of people say, yes, they will sleep, they will not work, they will be lazy, and blah, blah, blah. And the second question comes, okay, what about you? In case there is an implementation of UBI, will you stop working? Will you be lazy? Will you be quite passive and sleepy, etc., etc.? They say, no, I'm different. I'm not like them. I mean, this issue is something that we think it is appropriate for the others, but not for us.
Sure.
So this issue is, I mean, it is also proven by the pilots and the experiments that it's not correct, but still it's being discussed. But this experiment, hopefully in the future sometime, if we come together in a big meeting,
sure.
we can make this experiment.
I think that's a very interesting point. I think, yes, I think we have certain assumptions of other sections of society whenever we're making policy that maybe not borne out by either the data or personal experience. So I think Yeah, it's a very well made point. I want to go to you, Almaz, but a slightly different critique that I'd like you to respond to. And maybe I know you wanted to raise something in relation to what Malcolm was mentioning, but maybe you can tie that through to your answer. But one of the more interesting critiques of UBI that I've heard is that essentially by implementing universal basic income that allows people to benefit from money who don't need it, do we risk exacerbating existing inequalities due to the marginal propensity to spend of lower income brackets? Any kind of reaction and indeed that's seeing as that's kind of a broad reaching critique. If the rest of the panel would like to talk on that after Almaz, I'd very much like to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, so all these questions about what will happen to equality, inequality, et cetera, they really all depend on the details of implementation, right? So, we've given you the very kind of rough definition of what a basic income is,
Sure.
mostly by telling you what it isn't, how it differs from current welfare systems around the world. It really then, requires us to get down into the nitty gritty. So I think, Malcolm gave a little bit of a detail of, how a basic income might be implemented in the UK. I think it's really going to vary from country to country how it's implemented and what effects it has. So I think one of the important things is to determine in advance, what are your goals with the basic income? In the US, I think the goal has to be to eliminate poverty, right? It's ridiculous that the richest country in the world still has a poverty rate, even with a very meager, outdated poverty threshold of 15% of the population, and that's pre-COVID, right? That's before all of this unemployment. So we have to design a basic income in a way that, it attacks poverty. Economic insecurity is a kind of a broader measure than inequality. And in the US, again, we have an annual survey in which families are asked how much money they have on hand in savings to address an emergency. And every year, the result comes back somewhere between 44% and 47%. So almost half of Americans, again, almost half of Americans in the richest country in the world, saying they don't have $400 that they could access to meet a medical emergency or a job emergency, an economic emergency of unemployment. So we need to have a policy that allows families to start creating some savings, right? Sure. So they can be a little bit more resilient in the face of economic ups and downs. And then in the United States, we've got a very large inequality problem. So that also colors my thinking about the kind of taxation system or the kind of funding system, for a basic income. So it's hard to address that in a panel like this, where we probably have people from all, different countries, sure. But we really need to think about those goals. So certainly a basic income could be designed in a way that would meet the criteria for basic income, but that would exacerbate inequality. And we have to make sure that that doesn't happen. But that's maybe a little bit beyond the scope of this, particular discussion.
And I think from a little bit of what you said as well, it seems to me that taking a long lens on this, that there may be an exacerbation of income inequality in the short term, but the problem seems to be so bad at the bottom end of society that it kind of merits allowing the poorest of the poor in some respect to build that base so that I guess there's kind of a view of poverty that's absolute and then there's relative as well. So
yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't want to implement, if I were in charge of implementing a basic income, I wouldn't implement one that exacerbated inequality. But inequality has lots of different measures, right? So there's no one thing that's inequality in the society. So yeah, I would try to lift the economic fortunes of those in the bottom 50% of the US, and I would try to do it without significantly impacting the next 40% in the US, because those are people who work, they have some savings, but they're really not rich. It's really the top 10% in the US. I'd want to reduce, relatively speaking, their economic power and transfer that to the lower 50%.
Sure.
But could I go back to the question that Malcolm asked? Because I think it's a really important question, this, how do we get these counterintuitive ideas about basic income through? And this is where I think a gender perspective on the question of basic income is helpful, because, of course, it's no longer the case that women are the ones who are solely in charge of the family, or responsible for unpaid labor, but traditionally, historically, that has been something that falls disproportionately on women. So if you look at basic income and social assistance and social insurance programs from a gender perspective, what you see is that in fact women do a lot of unpaid work. Carers, if we want to use a gender neutral term, do a lot of unpaid work, and doing that work is not only a donation of that service, but often means that whatever income over the lifetime they might have earned had they not engaged in care work will be lower, right? So engaging in care work exacerbates inequality in society. That's why a basic income that helps to support that kind of unpaid care work can improve the situation of women. But thinking about women in basic income also, I think, encourages us to think about the family, right? And when we say that some of the things that Malcolm was saying are counterintuitive, it's because we're thinking of ourselves as individuals in the marketplace, right? Individuals in the marketplace are supposed to be motivated primarily by monetary, incentives and nothing else. But if you think about the family, we do every day the kinds of counterintuitive things that Malcolm was talking about, because we know that they're important to the development of our family, right? So we provide all sorts of unpaid benefits to the members of our family. We provide them, generally speaking, on an egalitarian basis, not according to who does more work or less work. And we know, for example, that if we have, older teenagers, people who are, maybe on the cusp of embarking on their own, adult life, that if we invest in them more, they are more likely to earn more and to be more productive and have more successful lives, however they define that, than if we don't invest in them, right?
Okay.
So particularly in countries like mine, where education is not free, parents pay a tremendous amount of money, for the education of their children in college and university, that will increase the value that the children will be able to have in their economic life in the future, right? So if we think about, what does it mean to purchase a car for our child? Again, in a country like mine, which is very vast and not much public transportation, right? That's giving somebody something for nothing, right? I'm giving my 18-year-old a car. But I know that if I don't give my 18-year-old a car, he won't be able to get to work, right? So actually providing this economic foundation is what allows people to be productive in society and productive in the marketplace. And we do it every single day in the family. So we need to shift our perspective from this impersonal, gender neutral, individualistic marketplace when we're thinking about these questions, and look at the institutions that we're all part of. We're all part of families where we give people things all the time. Now, I admit that there's a difficulty in taking that family model and extending it to a country of 60 million, 80 million, 100 million, 300 million. That's a leap for a lot of people. But if we start there, then I think we understand that we actually abide by these counterintuitive principles every single day of our lives.
Malcolm, just anything to tag on to what Almaz just said in terms of, it strikes me that the point you're making, Almaz, is almost that there are economic inputs given on a social basis every day that we haven't accounted for whatever historical and kind of societal factors. Yes. And in some respects, universal basic income is just almost plugging that gap in a way that should have been plugged maybe some time ago. Malcolm, I guess from your perspective, do you think as a critique, as an analysis, that holds water, and any further thoughts on that?
Yes, it does hold water. Two very different attitudes hold water at the same time. That's the conundrum that we face. And one of the really interesting aspects of British society and our social policy history is that before a universal service became universal, there was a lot of rejection of the idea of its universality, if that were to happen. But once we get a universal service, it's very popular. Now, yes, that's a problem. No, it's great, but it's a problem. The National Health Service was hard fought for, and we only got it because the Second World War got people used to the government doing things in ways that it hadn't done before. And we ended up with a Minister of Health after the war, who had experienced at a local level something like what he wanted to see in a national health service. That's Bevan.
Sure. No, Bevan.
And he wanted to turn the whole country into something a bit closer to his Welsh Valley. And we ended up with the National Health Service, which is a brilliant institution. And even the medical profession finally came round to it being a good idea, whereas they fought tooth and nail to stop it from happening. Similarly, we ended up with unconditional benefits for children after the war, purely through a policy, what we have to call a policy accident, because Eleanor Rathbone wrote a book, William Beveridge liked it, he tried the idea on staff at the LSE where as director, and then he stuck the whole idea into the preface of his report in 1942 when he shouldn't have done. That's how we got unconditional child benefits. And Rathbone's idea had been constantly rejected before the war, but once we got unconditional child payments, child benefit, it was very popular. And you've got to get over that step somehow, because we know, therefore, that if the basic income was implemented, it would end up as a popular move. And the problem is getting it there. And my hunch is that it may just have to be by policy accident. My hunch is that a developed economy like the UK will not have a government willing to do it, and as often happens, we will follow where others lead. And who will lead? I don't know. I can't predict. People ask me who's going to get one first.
No, sure. Just to draw on this slightly, Malcolm. So, I mean, as much as, so I wouldn't necessarily say this is a challenge, but more just, I'd like to elucidate on this a little bit, in that as much as it was a policy accident in terms of the situation being ripe for these policies to be advocated, I mean, there was a lot of advocacy done, but so I think the gentleman you're mentioning in relation to the NHS is Nye Bevan, who was part of the Attlee government, I believe. And there was a lot of advocacy done by him personally with the medical community who were opposed to it.
Yeah.
So as much as there
he worked really hard, yeah.
Absolutely. So, I mean, as much as there's kind of awaiting policy quirks and for the time to be right, there is very much a need for, active participation in the debate, in shifting the kind of policy thinking and the zeitgeist in many ways. So it probably, I mean, those two concepts probably walk hand in hand in some respect. And I suppose we may have gone from slightly optimistic to the other way around, but do you see any hints of that currently within the UK or around the globe in terms of that direction of travel?
I never predict. I
Sure.
don't know. I think what's important, I think, is that as many of us as possible do as much robust research as possible,
sure,
to make sure that the basis is always there. If political interest in a particular place becomes sufficient for implementation to be considered. Now, this is why we set up the Basic Income Research Group in 1984 in the UK, the first organisation in the modern period to facilitate debate on basic income. It's now the Citizens Basic Income Trust. And the idea was to keep research and debate going through what we knew would be quite a long trough in the global and national debate about the idea, so that next time there was an upturn in interest, there would be a solid base of research and educational material available to facilitate it. And we think that was a successful strategy, and BN has fulfilled the same role around the world to a large extent.
Sure.
We need even more of that. It wouldn't surprise me if after the pandemic subsides, we see another trough in interest in basic income, because the immediate circumstances of the upturn in interest will have passed. And what will be essential is that we keep the educational process going, the opinion surveys, the financial feasibility research, all of it in as many countries as possible, so that when eventually a country faces a political opportunity to implement a genuine basic income, people aren't looking around looking for new research and education of the public, because it's already happened. That's what we need to make sure occurs.
Sure. Ali, I was actually going to go to you. So yeah.
I mean, regarding this COVID issue or Corona crisis issue, I would like to say a few words because it has some other dimensions also, I guess. May I?
Yeah, you know, absolutely. I was going to go to you
okay.
next on this point. So nice segue. You anticipated my point.
No, the issue is, I mean, the Corona crisis, it's very interesting. At the very beginning, I mean, at the first stage, it was a health problem. But later, at the second stage, even before the health problem reached to our countries, it evolved into a psychological trauma problem affecting all the people. And these two come together, the health problem and the psychological trauma, in a global scale. They started first stage, the health problem, second stage, the psychological trauma, third stage, the economical damage. But this damage is mostly, I guess, will be permanent and irrecoverable.
Sure.
But the problem is, there might be a fourth stage. I think it's a very, very dangerous one. In fact, we started to hear and observe some evidences from different countries too. At the fourth stage, I guess the democracies are under threat. And if they do receive any damage, then life will be much more complicated and difficult for all people of the small world. I think UBI may be acting as a preventive and protective measure against such a risk too. I mean, not only about this issue, but under these circumstances, it has another perspective or another dimension. Because this first stage, health, second stage, psychological trauma, third stage, permanent economical damage, but the fourth stage, damage to the democracies might be very, very dangerous. And I don't want to talk in detail because we have a limited time, but I would like to raise this issue regarding the Corona touch to the UBI discussions. It didn't just speed up the digitalization of the processes. I mean, for example, banking industry, I mean, the financial sector, it's almost fully digitalized. Maybe in the coming days, maybe we will see that the branch offices of these banks will be closed and number of people who are working in these banks will be reduced. So this is something else, but this threat against democracy is also an interesting one.
Sure.
And we should concentrate, I guess.
Absolutely. I think, guys, we've had a very lively discussion. I think we're going to go to Q&A now. So to anyone joining us late, you're able to submit questions via the Q&A function in Zoom, and I encourage you to do so. We'll be going through the questions presently, but if you've got any further questions, please do raise them. I noticed, Almaz, you've been answering some of the questions in the background, and there's one question that you'd like to answer live, which is a question about immigration status. And I imagine this speaks to how do we implement or how do we think about a universal basic income for, so to speak, non-citizens? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, as I said a little earlier, you really have to determine who is a part of your political community, because the basic income has to be implemented by a political community. At least at first. Maybe at some point we'll get a truly universal global basic income, but that's not on the agenda for the moment. So we have to make these decisions about who counts, in a sense, for the status of a citizen or as a resident to receive the basic income. Now, I think many of us would argue for the broadest definition of who counts as part of the political community, but there are other ways potentially of addressing this issue too. So for example, in the United States, of course, we get a lot of immigration, economic migration from Mexico, for example. One of my colleagues in the US, Michael Howard, has argued for what he called a NAFTA dividend. So NAFTA was the name of a trade deal between the United States, Canada, and Mexico that our current president has replaced with a different acronym, but essentially the same treaty. So, you know, we could look at a regional basic income that would perhaps reduce the need for economic migration, at least to a certain degree. Certainly within the EU, one can imagine a regional basic income as well that doesn't, worry so much about who's a citizen of which particular country. But that is an issue that we have to address, and I think is sometimes left out of this question when we talk about a universal basic income. That sounds very, very broad, but it masks the fact that in many countries, I think we haven't quite grappled with what that means.
Sure. Johan has raised a question which I think I was hoping someone in the audience would raise, which is, will UBI lead to inflation, and what are the measures to prevent inflation? Malcolm, I wonder if you want to take that?
Yes, I'll do that. I'll also add something to what Almaz has said about the previous question. I put in the chat box, if people want to look, the results of a piece of research done in the UK about who precisely should receive basic income. Some years ago, we had a working group working on that tricky issue. It's a piece of research that needs to be done in every country separately, and it's not something you can possibly generalize about. Inflation, I'm often asked about that one. The answer is not a simple one. First of all, you get inflation when the money supply goes up, basically. If you put more money into the economy, each unit of money is worth less, and so you get inflation. That's a broad generalization, but it helps to think about that to start with. If your basic income scheme, and remember, it's always a scheme that will be implemented, not a basic income on its own. If your basic income scheme does not require any additional funding from outside the existing tax system, then there can be no inflation because there's no additional money in the system. And so the kind of research that we've done on feasible basic income schemes, which provide a basic income by reducing income tax allowances and existing benefits, that would create, there'd be no risk of inflation whatsoever. The slightly more complex answer to the question is this, and this is something, if you've read Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century, you'll be aware of this particular issue, that the proceeds of production and the total of individual incomes have been diverging over the last couple of decades. And that's left a gap between those two figures. It means that the incomes that people receive are no longer sufficient to purchase the proceeds of production. And one of the reasons why there has been so much household credit in order to fill that gap. And that's what's created financial crises, and will create another one. It will happen. The argument goes that if a government were to create new money simply to fill that gap, then it would not create inflation, because all you'd be doing is filling the gap between the currently earned and current personal incomes and the proceeds of production. And so they would then match, and there'll be no chance of inflation. And in fact, that's what we've seen with recent exercises in quantitative easing. Central banks have been putting new money into the economies of our countries, and inflation has remained remarkably low. So the answer is, if you were to fund a basic income with new money, government created new money, then that's something you could do up to a certain level. Unfortunately, once you've filled the gap, you can't keep on doing it, which means that you could use that method to fund an initial period of basic income, but you would then have to fund it from within the existing system after that, because you can't keep on putting new money into the economy. A slightly complicated answer, but the answer to the question is it's perfectly possible to avoid inflation when you implement a basic income.
So just to follow up on that, and Johan, by all means, feel free to follow up in the Q&A for any points for Malcolm, but it's interesting that you draw that analogy with quantitative easing, so 2 points on that. One is, as a counter to that, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here in terms of this analysis, but my understanding is most of the time with quantitative easing, after the money supply, the extended money supply has done its job, the Fed or central bank, kind of takes that back in and kind of presses cancel on their digital computer and the money disappears. Whereas with UBI, the idea is that stays in circulation for people to use. So do you see any kind of differentiation there? And then the other point to raise on quantitative easing is I personally find it interesting that people are politically more accepting of the notion of quantitative easing, but seem to be a lot more skeptical about the value of UBI. To put it another way, if we print money to circulate through the financial system within a closed loop, that's fine. But if you're handing out cash payments to regular citizens, that's to be viewed with suspicion. Any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure that people are happy with quantitative easing. I think you're
overblown.
Yes, you may be speaking from a particular perspective.
Sorry, Malcolm. So more comfortable, I guess, than.
Well, yes, I'm not sure people are. At least those who know what's happening are not comfortable with it. Because,
I think that's probably
that's probably true. Because what the recent quantitative easing exercises have done is to buy back government bonds, which simply increases the value of the government bonds, and therefore it increases the profits of those who already hold them, which isn't you and me probably. We know who it is, and so no, we're not happy with quantitative easing. And interestingly, we do know that the British government at the time showed a brief interest in quantitative easing being handed out to the whole population in order to maintain demand in the economy at the same time as putting new money into the economy, but found it couldn't do it because it simply didn't have the database to do it with. And that's one of the problems that so many of our countries face. Whenever there is a political opportunity to implement a basic income, the infrastructure simply isn't present. And one of the arguments we've all got to have is, given what's happened during this pandemic, wouldn't it be a good idea to put together the database that would now be required if that were to occur again and we did need to prop up every single person's income in the country? Because that takes a bit of time to do, and it takes some political will to put together the database required. But it's something that we could add to the number of things that we need to argue about constantly. That is, are governments ready to pay a basic income if they decided they wanted to do so? It's just as important a question as do they want to implement a basic income?
Absolutely. So question for you, Ali Mutlu, which is probably from more the advocacy and the advocacy side. And I noticed, Almaz, you've kind of answered this, but I'd be interested to get your thoughts, Ali Mutlu, which is from Flo Khan's, which is, in a nutshell, is that are we putting a lot of time into research and making the case for a universal basic income? And should there be more of an emphasis on advocating for implementing it from a political basis? And do we need to be a bit bolder in trying to put it on the table as a political policy?
To tell the truth, I mean, we are between friends, and I checked the attendees. I know many friends are there too, so we are talking between UBI advocates mostly. The issue is, UBI is a political choice at the end of the day. I mean, the funding problem is not the main problem. The main problem is whether the politicians or decision makers do have this political choice or not. For example, we have very interesting discussions regarding the pilots and experimental studies.
Sure.
I don't, I mean, when we go into detail, I'm sure you will not too. We are not happy with these experimental or pilot studies because they don't really reflect the situation. But we are doing this just to, we are losing time. So the idea should be to disseminate the idea as much as possible and to introduce pressure on the decision makers to implement this project. And activism and politics is two tools that we can use. And very interesting thing, what I would like to say is that at the moment, there are bi-weekly worldwide meetings. And during those meetings, we mostly try to exchange ideas, experiences from different countries. For example, what's happening in Spain? Okay, a friend is coming to the meeting and making a presentation about the situation in Spain. The other friend is telling what's ongoing in Canada. And we are receiving very interesting feedbacks or experiences from them, and trying to develop our reactions or actions, whatever. But the issue is, you are right, at the end of the day, it's a political choice, and the most important part is the political arena. The funding is a problem, but not the major problem. The major problem is in the decision makers' minds. I mean, we have to add pressure to them.
Sure. So question for you, Almaz, which is from Reinhard. Reinhard Leeds. So the question is essentially that, that there seems to be a level of what Reinhard is calling economic schizophrenia, in that when you have price increases that affect daily consumption, it's called inflation. But where we see an increase in the price of shares, it's called an increase in value. Can you explain this economic schizophrenia? And I think this touches on this touches on in some ways the analogy that Malcolm raised in relation to quantitative easing. But any kind of thoughts on that? Any response to Reinhard?
So I wish I could explain the economic schizophrenia. I don't think I can do that. But what I can say is that I think Mr. Lees is pointing to a larger problem about what it is we measure and whether what we measure reflects what we value.
Sure.
So just to give an example, closer to home for me, in the United States and in many countries around the world, we're facing degrowth right now, right? We're in recession because so many people have been thrown out of work because of the COVID crisis. If you look at, for example, the restaurant industry, well, clearly the restaurant industry is making very little money in, at least in the United States, because of all these restrictions on whether people could go to restaurants or not, whether restaurants can be open. Does that mean that people aren't being fed? Of course not. Right? The people who could afford to eat in restaurants now are doing just fine at home. They are buying food from the supermarket and they are making it at home. Right? So there is unpaid labor that is going into the production of that food at home. That's not counted in any of our economic statistics, right? The only thing is that it's counted as if we go out and pay for somebody to prepare the food for us, but not if we prepare it ourselves. So I think it points to a larger question, which is that, when we're thinking about, for example, the economics of the restaurant industry, yes, certainly one measure is, what's the total number of sales in restaurants in a given period. But we don't really care about the restaurant industry per se. We care about whether people are working. We care about whether people have income, whether they're working or not. And we care about whether people are being fed. So those are the things that we should measure, at least in addition to measuring, the employment or the revenue statistics of the restaurant industry. So yeah, we absolutely have to think about other measures of well-being that are as important as the ones that we hear on a daily basis. And I can't tell you how many times on a daily basis I'm told what's happening to the stock market. Right? The stock market doesn't affect 50% of Americans who have no money in the stock market, and another 30 or 40% have very little money in the stock market. It's for a very small percentage. And yet for unemployment statistics, we wait an entire month. Sure. Right? There's no sense to the kind of data that we get on a regular basis and that we highlight as a society. So that's part of, I think, the perspective shift that a basic income perspective gives us.
A very nuanced pivot that makes me feel glad that I'm chairing rather than I'm on the panel, Almaz. So thank you very much for that answer. I've got a question that for you, Malcolm, which draws upon something you mentioned at the beginning, which is that if we wanted to implement universal basic income in the UK presently, we don't have the data and technical infrastructure to do it in terms of accounting for everyone. Have there been any examples of countries around the world that have implemented that kind of infrastructure? Or in another respect, is there kind of a roadmap of how we might do that in the UK or otherwise in countries that lack that as kind of a forward-looking roadmap to a truly universal basic income?
Yeah, but I can add to something that Almaz responded to Reinhard's question, if you look back across history, there have always been separate conceptual frameworks for the wealthy and the poor. Even in terms of language, that's why we've still got two words for quite a lot of things in the English language. The cow is what people had to raise in the fields. They were the workers, so they looked after the cows. The people who ate the birth, the beef, they were the rich. So we still have cow and beef in the English language, completely pointlessly. Why do we do that still? But it goes back into history. And I'm quite sure that the issue that Reinhardt has raised, not that this isn't the question of basic income at all, but it's a fascinating question all the same, that shares have value because the rich own them and that's their conceptual framework, and their value goes up, and that's in that conceptual framework. It's the poor who suffer inflation, and so that's why you get two completely separate conceptual frameworks. Anyway, on the question that you were actually asking me about, can you repeat it again?
Sure. No, so it's something you drew upon, which I thought was quite interesting, which is that in the UK, if we wanted to implement a
that's right. Yeah. There are European countries who've already got it, who have a national, well, got quite a lot of it anyway, who have a national identity card system. So you've got quite a lot of data already in there. What's rare is a system that's got people's bank account details as well, that would enable you simply to pay everybody. Sure. Now, one of the really interesting things about India as a democracy is that it has a very complete citizens register. And one of the reasons why India could, if it wished, implement a basic income in, say, a particular state fairly quickly is they already have much of the necessary infrastructure in place, in ways in which the UK interestingly doesn't. What we have worked out is that in the UK, it wouldn't take very long to put together some of our existing databases in order to create the necessary complete database. The problem is the British psyche. A few years ago, in fact, it's quite a long time ago now, isn't it? It's well over, must be 15 years, a Labour government proposed a national identity card. And there was a group of civil servants working on it, and I knew one of those civil servants. And they all thought this was a purely practical administrative issue that they were involved in. Suddenly, all hell let loose. They didn't know what had hit them. The press was up in arms. The British public were furious. That's what we were being told anyway, because a national identity card was being proposed for the British people. And why on earth do we need that? And it was experienced as an attempt by the state to control the individual's freedom. Now, what was so irrational about that is that the UK already has vast numbers of different databases holding vast amounts of our personal information. And all you would actually need to do on the whole to put together a national database that would have almost everything you needed would be to put those together. And we've worked out how you could do that. So yeah, it's another psychological issue that the UK would have to get through, perhaps in ways in which other countries wouldn't. What's interesting about countries like South Korea is that there appears to be much more willingness to permit the state to have information about you, because that's regarded as some kind of sense of security, and it's not regarded as attacking your freedom. It's a totally different kind of mindset. And my second guess for a place that might implement a genuine basic income would be an individual province in South Korea, because they have quite a lot of such autonomy already. It's not impossible; it could happen there.
Sure.
And they've got the psychology to do it.
So just to pivot from what Malcolm was talking about, Almaz, and this is something a question that was raised by Ino Schmidt, particularly in relation to China, but I think the concept applies generally, which is that could a government, and I think it underlies the comment that Malcolm was making and in relation to the paranoia around centralized information systems. But could a government use a universal basic income essentially to incentivize the behaviors of its citizens? In that, you know, good behavior, you get a universal basic income, bad behavior, it gets taken away. Is there a discussion to be had around that? Or as Malcolm is shaking his head, so is that kind of distinction?
You'd no longer be discussing a basic income.
You can. That's the system we have now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basic income is to take away those conditions, those behavioral conditions. Yeah. So I think you know, Anna raised the question in relation to China because you know, China, of course, is an authoritarian state. It doesn't have a highly developed welfare system, so it is possible that it could implement something like this, and it has the technology and the, you know, the national registry and so on to do it very efficiently. So one could see them going in that direction. But yes, it would just be, you know, they would just be adopting the systems that we already have in the West, where we use cash benefits to reward certain kinds of behavior and to punish certain kinds of behavior.
I should point out to my esteemed panel that these questions are put to you from on behalf of our audience rather than myself, Malcolm. So it's not. But these are all very interesting concepts that I think I think package the discussions around universal basic incomes, its permutations, and also what are some of the concepts that underlie it. I see that we're close to time, so I was just wondering if we might do a final round robin of just you know, thoughts from each of our panelists, and then kind of wrap up. So Almaz, seeing as we're currently speaking to you, would you like to kick off, and then we'll go around the table?
Sure. I want to thank you for this opportunity to have this discussion, you know, with these great panelists and these terrific questions from the audience as well. I do think that we're at a particular moment, you know, sort of a crossroads for basic income globally now because of the COVID crisis, right? This economic crisis that results from the pandemic has demonstrated the precarity that many of us live in, you know, who depend fully on wages from employment. And so it's shown us what the need is for some kind of foundation of economic security. In the US, we've had the example of Andrew Yang's campaign to bring attention to the idea of basic income. So he's done a lot more to make it an accessible public concept than the philosophers and researchers who've been working on this for 3 decades. Sure. So that's a fantastic thing too. I do think that this is a moment, you know, where we also have a tremendous amount of activism around the murder of George Floyd in the United States and the Black Lives Matter movement. So all 3 of these together, I think, give us a unique opportunity to really press forward for a basic income. That's not to say that I predict that's going to happen in the United States or elsewhere, but I think we should recognize this as an opportunity to really push for it, not to push for more experiments or pilots or more research, frankly, but to push for at least a small unconditional benefit that goes to everyone.
Sure. Ali Mutlu, would you like to go next? Just closing thoughts from your side.
Yeah, in fact, maybe we couldn't go into the details, but the democracy issue is very important, I guess, because it's in fact the key issue for the other problems too. It's a kind of umbrella issue. And regarding UBI advocacy efforts, we have too many common and similar motives and reasons. But this one is a separate one. I would like to point this once again. And I think UBI, I mean, if implemented, will introduce vital contributions to people in order to be respectful individuals who do have economic independence, whose arms cannot be bent, who can participate to the social life and political activities, who can make choices, who can express their thoughts and preferences, and who do have bargaining power in their lives. At the end of the day, UBI is, I mean, very shortly, people say that it's ability to say no. I mean, in a positive sense. Yeah. So these are all directly related with the democracy practice. So I will again take issue back to the democracy related part. I think the democracy must and will enable UBI, and it is in fact will be the savior of herself. I'm sorry, maybe I couldn't convey my messages in a structured way, but
No.
one last thing I would like to say, that number crunching, I mean, the funding, the population, the monthly payments, what about the kids, what about the immigrants, etc., etc. These are all details. We should concentrate to the philosophy of the concept. And we never consider the improvements. I mean, not cost, but benefits from the improvements, because there are too many budget items in the governments because of the certain problems. But when UBI is introduced or implemented, then these problems will be solved. So it may differ from country to country, but from this, because of these solved problems, the money allocated to handle with these problems will be free. So it may be used during the funding of the UBI too. It's a long discussion. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It was great to be with you and with Malcolm and with dear Almaz, and thank you very much. That's all I can say at the moment.
Thanks, Ali Mutlu. And last but certainly not least, Malcolm, final word from your side.
I think it's been a really interesting discussion, which what particularly interests me about it is that it has raised a vast number of the issues that are circulating in the global basic income debate. It's managed to encapsulate them in a period of an hour and a half, and I think that's a credit to the audience and the panelists and to you who've organised it. So thank you very much for that. I think one thing that has come out of the discussion, and something that we've certainly learnt in the UK over the years, and this answers one of the questions that was recently up on the Q&A, is that it's not either or in most answers to questions, it's both and. So for instance, both basic income and other means tested and other benefit systems, you don't need to oppose them to each other. It's about both a basic income and better public services. These are not in opposition to each other. They would go very well together. And to work alongside other proposals and projects is going to be very important in the years ahead in this debate. And it's not a left thing and not a right thing. It doesn't belong to any particular ideology. And it means that people from different political parties can work together on this issue if they want to do so. And I hope we're going to see far more of this kind of cross-pollination, which is quite rare. And I think one of the important characteristics of basic income is it encourages precisely that kind of both attitude and practice.
Great. Thank you very much, Malcolm. Yeah, so from my side, just personally before I wrap up, I found the discussion both multifaceted and very, very interesting. I think it's definitely, in some respect, it's altered my views of some of the discussion and policy positions around universal basic income, both in preparing to chair this panel and in some of the points that you guys have put across. So really sincere thanks from a personal level. And from on behalf of the LSE Alumni Association, I'm sure that our audience and alumni community are going to find this very interesting. Definitely going to post this on our YouTube channel, so everyone who is participating will be able to access it. Our YouTube channel is publicly available. I'll be circulating it through the Eventbrite mailing list. So to the extent you didn't sign up for a ticket and you're a personal contact of any of our panelists, or you'd like to reach out to me personally, I'd be very happy to share that. But apart from that, thank you very much to our panelists, Ali Mutlu, Almaz, Malcolm, and thanks to all of you for attending. I think we'll end the session there, but thanks again and have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.